All right. Hello, everyone. You'll have to excuse the setup. I wish it could be more professional, but much like to the theme of my life, I'm making work what I can make work. I'm on the road, going about having a day, and so I will be doing this presentation, or I guess discussion really, in my car to you all. Nonetheless, same discussion or presentation you would have got whether we were in person or I was in some place other than my car, but here we are. So yeah, nice to meet all of you who are here. And when I say that, I don't just mean everybody who's in this Zoom. I mean to everybody of the future that ever watches this. Hello, thanks for stopping by and coming to this event. It was honestly such a privilege to be here, or it is such a privilege to be here. Thanks to Jose for letting me come on and talk about not only the story of my book, but also the story of me and how the things that have intertwined into my history and have shaped me as who I am today have come into play into the artistic ways that we express ourselves, which is super important in the community, especially in the Hispanic community. Thank you, Ramirez, for appreciating me being here. Appreciate it. I appreciate you appreciating me. Yeah, so I'll start off right off the bat by saying this is going to be a very different presentation that you've probably ever seen. There's going to be no slides, anything like that. It'll kind of be like the Instagram lives that I used to do on my personal Instagram page. So believe it or not, Jose, I've actually had some training for this because it's very similar in almost every respect. So I'll tell you guys a little bit about myself to get started. Well, actually, the title of my presentation, if I could give it one, would be The Price of Salvation, an American Epic from a Hispanic Perspective. And so that kind of has a double meaning to it. Which in a lot of my written works you will find I love to include. The Price of Salvation is the book that I have written, just came out this August, actually, of the year 2021. And it's been a project I've been working on for two years before it was published. It's been going on in the production process and everything for about 3 years now. And so huge passion project of mine and something that I plan on using for the rest of my life, because this method of expression is one that that I have grown and fallen in love with over the course of my history. So let's talk about that a little bit. So an introduction about me, and bear in mind, all of this will become relevant towards the end of this presentation. It all kind of comes full circle, so hopefully I could keep your attention. But my name, of course, is John Anderson. As you can see, I am very pale in complexion. Most of the Hispanic community is not as light as me, as from what I have found. However, the reason for that being is because my mom is a very, very white woman. In fact, she is as white as it gets. Her heritage comes straight back from the north, I think it is. I'm not sure, but it's places like Ireland, Scotland. Those very, very dark places, very cloudy places, but that makes for light-skinned folks. So on that side, I'm a very white-sided American, but on my Mexican side, my father came from Mexico, and it was a purebred, as they would say, Mexican man, and then they both had me. And so I bring this up because it is a relevant topic into basically a little bit more about how this book connects to Hispanic perspective. I have to excuse me. Sometimes my voice doesn't work with me. Hispanic perspective. The double meaning of my title is that not only am I going to talk about this book from a perspective of being Hispanic solely on me, but also that it's written from the perspective of a Hispanic person with an interesting kind of raising in this great country known as America. To tell you a little bit about my Hispanic background, I was raised prominently with I don't know if I want to say white culture, because I hear that's kind of a negative term these days, but I don't know how else to word it. So basically, like, I wasn't really in my own home. I wasn't very familiar with Spanish or Mexican culture in general. However, outside of my home, whether it would be at the schools that I went to or the extended family that I have, it was all Mexican Hispanic culture. And so I had a very strange halfway point between understanding my two cultures. I had the white side of me that was speaking English, and we'd eat. We were very poor, regardless, but we'd eat mostly white styled foods, because my mom was the one who would cook all the time. And her being a white woman raised in Lordsburg, New Mexico, knew how to make those things. And so I never really got to be raised on, eating beans and rice for dinner and corn tortillas. We did more like we had those sometimes, but it was mostly just whatever poor food that most white folk eat, which is like sandwiches and some macaroni and cheese and hamburger meat. Really inexpensive foods that we could make that we were very familiar with. And so a part of my culture was very much split directly in half, but almost non-existent at the same time. And so this came into play where I started to, as I got older. Fun fact about me, I never knew particularly my real father either. And so a bit of a dark segue here, but I never got to know him. And so even that side of my Mexican culture was never really developed on. And so I grew up not knowing a lot of an identity and not knowing a lot of belonging. And this was only amplified by going to schools where I was faced with an interesting predicament, because in my area, I was in poverty areas, and I was one of the few very lightly complexioned students in all of the schools that I ever went to. And in middle school, it got particularly bad. I would go to the school, and I was in a sense too white to be Mexican, but then I would have a little bit of my Hispanic culture in me. So I was too Mexican to be white. And so I was constantly in the state of, I don't know where I belong. And, as a kid, that's a very, blatant way that it kind of affects you. But as you grow older, you kind of start to develop on it both mentally and emotionally and physically. You start to wonder, like, why do I look like this? Whatever, you start to get all these different things that you deal with over time, and these complexes start to develop more and more and more and more so. And so that kind of leads me into the price of salvation, right? And I know it's a bit of an odd segue, but trust me, stay with me, it'll make sense in the end. I started to have these complexes of figuring out I don't know where I belong, and I don't know if I can belong, and I don't know what exactly I have that can represent me. I don't know if I'm supposed to be Mexican, if I'm supposed to be white, if I'm Hispanic, and if I am Hispanic, can I be Hispanic? I got these weird complexes where I have if I speak Spanish, I know a little bit, and again, I wasn't raised prominently in the Spanish language being spoken in my house, but if I speak Spanish, I have a wonderful accent. I can do it very well. I can understand it very well. But I remember, and even sometimes today, you'll get this insecurity of like, well, can I speak Spanish? I'm white. And it's like, well, you're not though. You're Hispanic. You got a little bit of both, and you can. It's okay. And but these insecurities started to develop, and they start out these small little saplings, and then they grow into this massive monster by the time you're 18 or 20. And so it's kind of a hard thing to deal with, and everybody processes things differently. I just so happened to be given the wonderful gift to process everything that I go through writing, and I cherish it very much. And I know that the experiences I've gone through have helped to other people deal with some of the same things that I dealt with, not just in this way, but this way being one of the primary things that I had to deal with as a child, kind of expanded into everything that we have to deal with on the average everyday basis. But in the Hispanic community, it's something that, it's my own personal connection to it. And so one of the three main themes, and if you see me looking over, it's because I have a little piece of paper that I wrote down my presentation on. Because if I don't write stuff down and I don't keep me going in order, I will take like forever to give these things. And I want to try to keep it to 30 to 45 minutes. So the price of salvation, it has three main themes. And to tell you guys a little bit about the book itself, it is an American epic that takes place in the year 1902. And it is told from the perspective of Thomas St. Hart, who's an American outlaw of the Arizona West. And so if you know about outlaws in 1902, they really did not belong anymore. They were being hunted down and eradicated due to modernization. And so it puts Thomas in a precarious position to start thinking about the three main themes of the American spirit which is family, faith, and freedom. And what are those? And can an outlaw truly attain that after living a life of being an outlaw and all those things? And so that's the main basic Spark Notes summary, leaving all spoilers out, of my book. And of course, he meets a lot of other characters who kind of help him along with this journey. But that's the main summary of the story. You might be thinking, well, how does that connect to being a Hispanic and being raised the way that I was? Well, you start to, when I started to study this book, not the book, but I was writing it, studying the stuff to put in the book, I started to discover that I had a lot of similarities to outlaws and their thinking, and the ways that they were perceived and they were portrayed and things like that. I started to discover that I had a lot of commonalities with these characters of the Old West, and primarily, not belonging, feeling like you don't belong, feeling like you're a part of something that's not entirely yours, that you don't have a piece in anymore. It's a time that's far gone now, and modernization is changing things, and the world is quickly and progressively moving forward, and you're kind of just stuck in the past, still trying to figure yourself out. And I started to discover that as I wrote Thomas, any writer who writes, you will, if you study out the characters enough, you'll see a little bit of them in every single one of their characters. But I heavily connected to Thomas in the way that he perceived the world and started going through all of his complexes. And so I started to ask myself, what is family, what is faith, and what is freedom? And to avoid as many spoilers as I can, I'm going to be kind of vague here, only because, obviously I'd love for you all to read it. But half of the experience of the book is figuring these things out as you go along. But this is a presentation, so I'll give you some stuff. But so what is family? What can you truly identify with? Who can you latch onto? Who can you depend on? And it's these concepts that really have shaped the founding of America. We're a huge mixing pot, especially in the West, a massive mixing pot of folks. And I remembered as a kid, like I said, I didn't really know my dad. I had a stepfather, I still do, and my mom, of course, and I love them both to death. But it did create for a strange identity crisis, because I didn't know who my family was. And I couldn't really fit in with the Mexican community or the white community. So I kind of was just like this weird little outsider who didn't have a sense of family. And I didn't know what that was and how to find it. And I'll say this as least spoilery as I can, but in a way, family isn't necessarily who you're born with, or who has the same blood as you, or the same culture as you even, or things like that. It's who you can depend on no matter what, who will always be there for you no matter what. And so then I started to think about faith. And I will tell you this, the price of salvation is a very faithful story. There's no sugarcoating it here. Obviously, as it sounds, it's a story that deals a lot with faith, but faith can be interpreted in many different definitions. You can have faith in God, which is the primary thing that everybody immediately goes to. You can have faith in each other. You can have faith in an idea. And really faith is just belief, right? It's just believing in something. And so you can believe in many things in your life, but it starts to narrow down to what can you believe in that'll really work for you at the end of the day. And not just you, of course. What works, what is something that we can all believe in? And ultimately, that's what people really look for. That's what I looked for. I was trying to find something to believe in so that I could find some form of an identity. Figure out who I was, what am I supposed to be? And so, in my story, obviously, to give you a little bit more background about myself, I am myself a Christian. And of course, being that as it may, some of my values obviously will slip into there. But, it's more than just a story of, the Christian values and things like that. There's a lot more to Christianity and those things that people don't really dive into. And so it gives it kind of a negative connotation to some folks. And sometimes if you dive into it, you get even more of a negative connotation. So it's a fine balance. And really, when you start to dive into those things, it's a very complex thing that you really have to ponder, because it's also pondering your reality, pondering what it is you want to believe in. And so, again, dealing with the things that I dealt with, this identity crisis, starting from the saplings of just not even knowing whether I could be Hispanic or not, I started to, of course, look to other things, look to something bigger than myself, something like God. And I was raised in a Christian home. And again, ironically, everybody in my church is also Mexican. So it was very hard. It really, really forced me to get that personal relationship, which is the key thing in any form of Christianity. So what is faith? That's the farthest I'll go, because the rest is kind of spoilers, but you can of course apply that to many things. But what really works? That's the biggest question. And of course, freedom, the other big theme. It's freedom is something that today is flopped back and forth in definition, of what does it mean? Is freedom, being able to do whatever you want? Is freedom having rules and regulations to limit what it is you can do for the better of everyone? What is freedom? And it's very relevant to today. There's actually a line from my book. It's the first line of the entire book. And it reads, "Once upon a time, in a world much like our own." And so I wrote this very specifically because there's two parts to that sentence. Once upon a time, comma. And what that sets up is like this fantasy world, right? Whenever we hear once upon a time, we think, oh, medieval fantasy, or like fantasy, fairies, dragons, whatever, like those kinds of things. And which I am a fan of. So it's kind of a little personal Easter egg to myself. Not fairies particularly, but you know what I mean. And but fantasy, right? It takes us to a fantasy world. That's the main point. But then you have the second half of the stanza, or whatever you want to call it, which is in a world much like our own. And it sets up this kind of subliminal tone for, this is a story of fiction, but it's very relevant to today, because it is eerily reflective of the world that we live in. And that's done very intentionally. The works that I put forward, I love to connect them to what matters, right? If you're going to do a story, you might as well make it a good one that's going to at least help somebody in some way. Or, in fiction, really the main point of fiction is to change perspectives. It's to, and by change perspective, I mean like open up doorways to other viewpoints and things you might have not thought about before. That's kind of the whole point of fiction. And I don't know if you guys have heard of the circle analogy, where you have your own like cultural circle, or your own like circle you're raised in, and fiction has the ability to punch holes in it. And they have a term for that analogy or metaphor, whatever you want to call it. But I don't know what it is. I just know that that's what it is. That's how fiction works, right? You have your circle, and it is punching holes in all of those things. And so that's why I chose fiction, because though it is a story of fiction, it is also very much relevant to today. And these things that are talked about in the book are relevant to today. And if you look at it from a Hispanic perspective, it's all relevant to today. I mean, it was written by a Hispanic with an identity crisis. I mean, what more do you want to know? And I think that I actually just missed a message from Ira. Oh, she said, "I love your story, John. Thank you for sharing it with us." Yeah, you're absolutely welcome. Thanks for stopping by while you did. But yeah, all these things are very, very relevant to the times of now. And so, to avoid going over the same thing over and over and over again, one other topic that I wanted to connect to was modernization. And so, obviously, in the Old West, there was a big shift in culture. There was a big shift in the world moving forward. And interestingly enough, it kind of connects to, there was a lot of minorities in the Old West as well, because like I said, it was a huge mixing pot. It was a huge world of these people who were from everywhere. You had Chinese folks, you had Mexican folks, white folks, black folks, like all over the place, from all over the world. And the reason why was because the West was such an easy way for you to kind of get in. But then you had modernization coming by the form of the railroad, which was this huge shift in the ways that people were living. And it created a lot of like a crisis for most people, because people were like, well, I mean, especially outlaws, the time of the outlaw was over. It was, the cavalry was right around the corner, and you had the government, sneaking in, taking over the land, turning the territories into actual states. And the moment that a territory becomes a state, law and order is about to be put in, because you got to make that money worth it, or make the purchase worth the pay. And so you started to get this strange feeling of my time is up, and the West is dying, and the things that I knew before are no longer something that I can do anymore. And so that's an interesting perspective for Thomas that he has, and it's something that's definitely a main driving point of the story. And modernization, in a simplistic definition, I suppose, can just be, things progressing forward, and everything's a progressive movement. Again, another word you don't want to throw around so much, but progressiveness is just progressively going forward, growing, changing, evolving, and we all do that, every day. We all are raised in a certain way, and we're raised in a certain environment, and as we get older, we're thrown into new environments and new things, and stuff changes. I mean, even for me, you look back, 10 years before now, and things were drastically different than they are today. And you want to talk about, culture and race and things like that. Well, I mean, you guys saw, you guys know what's happening. You guys live in America. I'm sure most of you do. And it's very, very different these days. And it really has forced us to kind of find a sense of identity. And most people have found it in fighting for different, what would you call it? Movements, or fighting for different people, or fighting for, like everybody's got something to fight for these days, but it seems like everybody's fighting. And so, but sometimes that's what it takes, and that's the thing about progressiveness, is that you can't stop it. It's an inevitability. It is something that, whether you like it or not, it is coming, because people change, people evolve, cultures evolve, entire, countries evolve and change over time. And so I'm taking these ideas and I'm telling them in a very, very simplistic Western, but the themes are all there for you to dive into if you'd like. And that's what I did. The reason why I bring up I have this gift to be able to express the things that I go through is because, to loop it back to me, the gift is a way for me to deal with everything that I've had to go through. In a sense, some people that go work out, like when they get angry at the end of the day, they're like, I'm going to go work out, and they get it out. They kind of deal with their demons that way. My way is writing. My way is telling stories. My way is doing poetry and short or fictional tales. I can't call it short anymore. It's kind of a long book, but fictional tales. And I did short films for a while, and plays and musicals. Like that's how I've dealt with all of my demons. And so progressiveness is not just limited to a whole entire folks. It's limited to ourselves. I mean, we evolve constantly from the age of 1 to until we die. Every 7 years, if you look back at yourself, you're pretty much a different person than you were 7 years ago. And so it's a constantly evolving thing. And so as I started to evolve into these deeper crises and complexes that I had with myself, I knew I had to get it out, and I got it out in a book. And so it deals with these things, and I think that you can connect them to your own life, and especially me. I didn't know a lot about who I was for a long time. 24 years old now, and I didn't really start to figure out who I was until about I was 22, 23. And that's when I really started to finally solidify, hey, I think I got an idea of what I'm meant to do here. If I can be Hispanic or not, if I should speak Spanish confidently or not, if the tone of my skin defines who I am culturally, if I even have any of those cultures, and the fact of the matter is I did. I just didn't have it a lot, but I did. All of my grandmas, my abuelitas, they were all Mexican ladies, and I'm thinking back on them a lot. They're all gone now, unfortunately, but wonderful women who have just shaped my entire life, really. My auntie or my grandma Christina, my grandma Tilly, and my Papa Gene. He was also in the Hispanic culture. He was also a Native American. Just these main pillars in my life who really inspired most of my growth. And of course, my church folk, all Mexican people, and they were a huge inspiration into my culture as well. So, I mean, let me see what else we have here. We're almost done. I'm running out on the end of my time here. Um, so yeah, I guess the final capstone to all of this would be, how did I make it out? Right. How did I figure out? Because truth be told, a little bit of a self-testimonial. When I got to the point of writing The Price of Salvation, I kind of my crisis wasn't just like, oh, what was me? Who am I? No, I got to very, very dark places. I'm a very deep thinker. And for those of you who know deep thinkers, I would offer you this bit of advice. Never let them think too long. Always keep an eye on those ones. And it's always the people who are smiling and laughing and, joking. Those are the ones you got to watch out for. Those are the ones who've got a brain that does not know how to stop. And so if I could give you some advice, if you know a deep thinker, I'll check up on them every once in a while, because you never know what they might be thinking about. And for me, I got really, really bad, and it started off small, but it got to a point of, I didn't even know if it was I didn't even know if it was worth sticking around, so much at a certain point in my life. And that was about a few years ago. 3 years now, when I started thinking of The Price of Salvation. And when you get to dark places, there's many ways you can pull yourself out of it. But this is my story, and thus, since it is my story, I'll tell it how I came out of it. And obviously, my religious my religious raising, my religious culture really started to come into play. And like I said earlier, it's more than just being a Christian, right? Anybody can be a Christian. Anybody can say they're a Christian, is what I should say. But what does it mean to truly, truly be one? And sometimes when it's strange, because when you don't have another sense of identity and anything else, when you find something that really works for you, you latch onto it really quickly. And so I wasn't raised with much of anything. I had like all these mixing pots of stuff, but God to me was a firm foundation that I could look at and go, yeah, this makes sense to me. This works. This doesn't change. This is unmoving. This is a solidified ground. And it was more than just what the preacher told me from behind the pulpit or what the church sang about in the song leading sessions. It was a personal relationship, because I had nothing else. There was nothing else there. And there was nothing else that was working for me. I couldn't believe in the government, because who knows what they're saying half the time. Right. And that, hey, again today, who knows what's going on half there. Can you really trust somebody who rules over you? Who knows, right? You can't ever know for sure. Some people can do that, and that's pretty awesome, good for them. But I couldn't. I just could not do it. I couldn't pull myself to do it. Could I believe in family? Well, what family? Right? Most of them were gone, and some I didn't connect with, and the ones that I would have had the opportunity to, they left. And so, I didn't have any of that, but I did have faith. And so my faith got me through those things, and got me through dealing with all those complexes. And thankfully, at least in my church, like I said, it's a lot of Mexican and Hispanic folk, and so we actually do a lot of Spanish songs in there, and so I do get a little bit of Mexican culture there. But again, it happened in the church. It happened in places where it was me building on my relationship with God, and how I decided to find an identity, at least there, because that's really somewhere, at least for me personally, that I was able to find a firm identity in, was with Christ. And so obviously all of my tales that I write, they're going to have some form of an inspiration with that, and you will definitely see that in my book, because at the end of the day, you can break it down into many different things, and you can identify in many different places. But in my own personal experience, the thing that I have found that is a constant, it doesn't matter the culture, the familial attachments, the freedoms that you have, the government that rules over you, the friends, the anything, the one that'll always be there for you at the end of the day is always God. You can always depend on that. And so back to The Price of Salvation. If you go and read the book, you will see how these characters interact with that concept. I will say this, not to make much spoilers, but not everybody's just gung-ho about it, because that's reality, that's life. It definitely invites you into making your own decision, because the best way to deal with the complex like what I had is not to have something forced down your throat and told you this is how it is, this is how you need to believe, and this is how you should be, and you're not wide enough to be or you're too white to be Mexican and you're too Mexican to be white. It doesn't matter what other people tell you. It's about what you discover within yourself and what you deem after you go on this journey, both mentally and spiritually and emotionally and physically even. Um, and it is about what you discover within yourself. And once you can solidify that within yourself, there's nothing that can shake you from that. You know, and that goes for many different situations. I believe the one with God is the most powerful of them all, because it is the one that speaks most truthfully to everything and most powerfully and most intimately. But you can definitely have people who maybe just don't believe in it. They can't pull themselves to do it. And there is characters like that in my story. And there's some who are almost blindly faithful to it. And you blindly faithful to God, I mean, and you can kind of look at that and be like, wow, that's awesome. But then you can also see that there is some badness to that, because it can slowly evolve and grow into something that it was never meant to be in the first place. And so, and then you have, of course, the person right in the middle who's balanced between the two and is just trying to find a way that works. And in this instance, right, the way, the truth, and the life, as you might want to interpret it as. And so, but the beauty of the story is, if you're watching this and you're like, oh, I'm not a very religious person, that's okay. You don't have to be to read the book. You'll be taken on a Western journey regardless of your beliefs. It's up to you to decide what it is that you believe and what it is that you think is true, because that's what I did. And so I think, let's see, I think that's pretty much my entire interpretation of the thing, or my entire presentation. And I'm coming up with like 10 minutes left. I think I'll probably cut it short here now, because I don't know if I need all the rest of the 10 minutes. But yeah, the price of salvation is the first of many stories that I'm going to tell. And because there's many stories that are within me, from the history that I've been given and the tragedies that I've experienced and the beautiful things that I've witnessed. And you know, the darkest days make the sunniest ones even brighter. And that is something that is important, you know. And another tidbit about me, I tell people I'm a realist, but I find myself often thinking I'm a dark person. And you know, it's odd. It's very odd, because you see me smiling and laughing and being kind of whatever this is. And it's, you think, well, how can that person be a dark person? So I tell you, deep thinkers, you got to watch out for them, because they are this. When we express ourselves, we know what it's like to go through certain things, and we don't want anybody else to feel that. And so we do our best to give you the very best, but on the inside, there's a lot that is being dealt with. And, you know, for myself, I'm a very dark person. I'm a very realistic person. And I'm a very dark person in the sense that sadness is something that has always plagued me. And I will say, you know, depression, I could go as far as to say that, but I don't like to say those words, because then people immediately identify you with being depressed. And I'm like, well, I'm more than that, you know. I do struggle with it, but I'm more than it. And so, you know, but you find ways to take the things that you've gone through and you put it into a funnel and say, I hope this helps you. And that's what the whole point of the price of salvation is. It is a story that says, you know, someone's here to help. And who is that to you? It's up to you. Is it John Anderson? Is it God? Is it the family? Is it freedom? What is it? I don't know. You got to figure it out. My book is just there to help you along the way. And of course, more than anything, tell you a great story. The tale itself, if you look at it just from a good old fashioned American story, it's a beautiful story of the hero's journey that everybody loves. And you never get sick of it. You never get sick of this tale. And, you know, great. I think that you can hear a story, you can hear the same story multiple different ways, but as long as it's done very well, you'll still enjoy it. And I know that's probably not the best way to talk about my book or myself, because it's like, well, I mean, if you're just like everybody else, then who cares? But it's not. All right. If you miss out on this book, you're missing out on something you've never read before. And, you know, dealing with all the things from my Hispanic raising, and now I identify as Hispanic, and everybody asks me, what are you? Are you you know, Mexican, white? What are you? I'm like, oh, I'm Hispanic. And I'm okay with saying that now. I didn't used to be. When I was a kid, I would just say I was white. and I've said I was white for like a lot of times, and I remember it was like it would always bother me. But you can take those and you put them out there, and you say, here it is. I hope it helps. And I guess if I could give any summary, um, I wrote this little section down here at the bottom of my little presentation, and it reads, The Price of Salvation is an American epic that is written for everyone by a Hispanic with an understanding of feeling like they don't belong spiritually, physically, emotionally, and mentally. How do we find peace in these situations? Well, that you have to figure out. How'd you have to figure out by reading the book? But I think if you've heard this presentation, you probably get a general idea of what I'm after. And yeah, so I would ask for questions. I don't know. I think there's maybe one, or no, it's just me and you, Jose. Okay, great. Well, me, Jose, and then all the rest of you who watch this in the future. I would ask for questions, but nobody else is here now. But of course, if you do have questions or you do want to reach out to me, you are more than welcome to. You can find me on Instagram at actually John Anderson. And you can also email me at andersonsemail@gmail.com. That's ANDERSUNS and then email EMAIL @gmail.com. Kind of a weird one, but if you would like to get to know me more, or you have questions about what I said, or you just want to keep up with the stuff I'm doing, you can do that there. And yeah, I think that's my presentation. I'm pretty much out of time now. So I hope that this was great for you all as much as it was for me. I had a great time. I love to do these things. These are like probably my favorite thing to do of all the stuff that I do concerning the creative works that I do. I love making these connections with folks. So yeah, I think, I don't know how you want to end this, Jose. I don't know if you want me just to leave or just to say goodbye to everybody. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. And thank you so much, Jose, once again, for having me on this Hispanic Heritage Month special, these shows that you guys are all doing. Do I call them a show? I don't know. I see them as a show. They're, these great presentations, these wonderful perspectives on Hispanic culture. I hope that my perspective was one that you found interesting. All of you who are watching this, I hope that it was one that was unique and was engaging and so on. But I think that's it for me. So thank you all so much once again. Take care. And I guess I will see you next time. See ya.